John is one of the UK's leading CEO coaches and advisors. He's worked with over 130 CEOs over the years.
Yeah, 22 different countries.
Around 22 different countries. To get us started, it'll be great for you to let us know how you got here, what you do, who you are. Just give us a brief intro.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so Dr. John Blakey, my passion is leadership, purpose-driven leadership. I've been a leader. So I was international managing director in a FTSE 100 PLC back in the day. I've set up businesses myself as an entrepreneur, and I coach entrepreneurs, business leaders, and also leaders in elite sport. So those are the three aspects of my work: leadership, coaching, writing, speaking.
Great. What books have you written that have gotten you sort of to this point?
First book I wrote was called Challenging Coaching. That came out in 2012. Second book I wrote was called The Trusted Executive. That was based on 6 years academic research at Aston Business School. That came out in 2016. And last year...
Wow, a little plug.
This book came out, Force for Good, How to Thrive as a Purpose-Driven Leader. So I'm very much on the road with this book right now.
So purpose-driven leadership forms quite an integral part of what you talk about. So I know it's in the name, but can you just break it down for us? What is it? Why is it so powerful? And what underpins your stance on this?
Yeah, so purpose-driven leadership, if you think about the difference between living a life of success or a life of significance, or running a business that's successful or running a business that's successful and significant. So purpose is about that transition from success to significance. The reason it's powerful is that purpose taps into the deepest drivers and motivators, our values, our personal values. So many of the listeners might be familiar with a model called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the highest level of the hierarchy of needs, level 6, Maslow talked about 1% of the population that are motivated by their intrinsic values. And it's those people that are standing for values and standing for purpose. And they're leading successful businesses, but they're also wanting to have an impact, a positive impact on the world in terms of that triple bottom line that you mentioned earlier.
What is the relation between business success and that sort of purpose-driven leadership?
Well, sometimes I think leaders have thought that I can either be successful or I can be significant. I can either maximize profit or I can stand for purpose.
Morals go out the window, business takes over.
Yeah. But my mindset, my belief, and the evidence of the work that I do is that you can have both. You can be both successful and have a positive impact. It's not a mutually exclusive model. And I think particularly in the times that we're living in now, it's very important for leaders to believe in that and to stand for that it's not mutually exclusive. It's not either profit or purpose. We can have both, and the world needs us to stand for both.
Yeah. In an age right now where the political landscape is so tumultuous, and a lot of the leaders are not leading by example in a way that is inspiring or moral-based or purpose-based. It's quite sort of gangster in a way.
Yeah.
You know, I was listening to a podcast on that the other day, how it's all like gangster sort of.
It's gangster,
it's mob style leadership.
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah.
So that's some global companies are following suit. There's a big pushback on this. How can this be combated? How can you sort of steer it more in the direction that's more humane?
Yeah. Well, a quote I like is, when the room gets darker, it's an opportunity for your own light to shine brighter. And the room's getting a bit darker at the moment. So courageous leaders, I think, see that as a call to action. They see that as a moment to stand up and to find their voice and to dig deeper for that purpose. So I think we can respond to the current events in two ways. We can shrink back or we can step forward. And my call is to challenge leaders to step forward at this time. I mean, I've been doing this work on purpose over the last 12 years, speaking about it. The reaction of CEOs to my message has varied over that time. When I first started talking about it in 2016, it was considered to be a bit blue sky. This is great, it's very inspiring, but we've got a business to run.
Yeah.
When we got to sort of 2020, 2021, and the changes that were happening in the workplace at that time, I had a lot of CEOs who were saying, yeah, we get this. We want to do it, let's make it a practical thing. And of course, in the last 3 months, I had a lot of CEOs saying to me, John, this is all very well, but what about Donald Trump?
Yeah.
So we have phases, there are phases, there are fashions, different leaders come and go, but there are also some timeless aspects of leadership that stay the same. And I think this purpose-driven aspect, if you look over time, it's purpose-driven leaders that have stood the course and come through in the long run. So I think as we see things wax and wane at the moment, the gangster style that you talked about, it's tempting, isn't it? It's tempting to think, oh, should I fit in? Should I fit in and follow the crowd?
Yeah, does good win? Do good people win?
Does good win? Inside each leader is a force for good and a force for bad.
Yeah.
Which one wins?
Yeah.
The one you feed.
I don't really know.
The one you feed.
Okay.
So it's time to feed the good one, to find the good one and feed it, because we are in a time where it's not going to just happen passively.
Yeah, I agree. So how can leaders stay true to this purpose within that? So dealing with publics, so there's one thing feeling morally, this is what I should do in your private life, but then there's public scrutiny, there's polarization. So what's good for me, what I think is moral and I think is good, isn't necessarily what my neighbor thinks is good.
Yeah.
So how can leaders navigate increasing polarization, which is off the charts, and public scrutiny?
Yeah. So in the new book, I talk about a model, 3 dimensions of purpose-driven leadership. The intention of these dimensions is to help leaders thrive rather than just survive in the current environment. And the 3 dimensions are, there's the upper purpose-driven leadership, the upper purpose. There's the inner purpose-driven leadership, the inner resources. And then the outer purpose-driven leadership, the outward followership. So how do I stay connected to my purpose? How do I find it? How do I stay connected to it? How do I feel the joy of that purpose? How do I look after my own motivation and resilience as I run the race? And how do I make sure that when I look over my shoulder, there are other people coming with me on this purpose-driven journey? So that's the up, the in, and the out. And typically in my experience coaching CEOs are naturally stronger at 2 out of the 3. But one of those 3 dimensions could be the Achilles heel, could be the risk, could be the one that trips them up in the current times. So I'm very much helping leaders think about these 3 dimensions and work on the dimension that is potentially the Achilles heel for them.
Do you have an exercise that you'd recommend to leaders?
Well, I have exercises. In the book, I've got 19 different exercises, each of which applies to one of these 3 dimensions.
Okay.
I can talk about a couple of examples of those exercises if you'd like me to.
I'd love you to.
Yeah.
Wow, we're here. When in Rome.
Okay. So let's take one from the upper purpose-driven leadership about staying connected with your purpose.
Okay.
Every Sunday evening around about 7 o'clock, I spend 10 minutes on my phone answering a question. And I've answered the same question every Sunday evening at 7 o'clock for the last 12 years.
Wow.
The question is, how am I going to honor my values this week? And then I have a list. I've got 7 values there. 2 of my values are courage and sharing. A little bit of what we're doing at the moment, it takes courage to put a message out there, and we're sharing. So when I looked at my diary this week, and I think I'm coming here today to talk with you about the work, then I think, okay, I'm going to honor my values when I'm with Rebecca this week talking about this. I'm going to honor some of my values. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at my diary and I'm making sure my diary is purpose aligned. And if you do that every Sunday evening for 12 years, it's like compound interest for the soul. It's like investing in your pension, but it's even more powerful because it accumulates, because you start to live a more values-driven life. So that's an exercise in the up. Shall I carry on?
Yeah.
An exercise in the in. So this is about motivation and resilience. So part of my work, I've been fortunate to work with Team GB Olympic squads. And one of the squads I worked with was the Team GB rowing squad as they prepared for Rio. And they had an exercise which I've borrowed and used with my business clients, which they called radiators and drains. And every quarter, they put a flip chart up and they put a title at the top of one page, radiators, and a title of the other page, drains. And then they listed on the radiators all the people, places, roles, activities, responsibilities that lifted them up. And on the drains column, they listed all the people, activities, roles, responsibilities that pulled them down. And then they asked themselves the question, how do we maximize the radiators and minimize the drains? And they do that every quarter. So again, that's a simple, it's not rocket science. It's discipline. A lot, you know, that word you use, a lot of it is discipline. Daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly habits that maximize the up, the in, and the out of purpose-driven leadership.
And it's so helpful to have that, because you might instinctually know that you want to lead with purpose, but then you don't necessarily even know where to begin, because there's so much going on in the world and there's so many different things to deal with. So many leaders are spread thin. So it's a great way to really touch base.
Yeah.
And sort of make sure that everyone's on the same page.
Yeah.
So that's what, is that, would you call that a model?
The up, the in, and the out, 3 dimensions of purpose-driven leadership. Yeah, that's a model that's in my latest book, Force for Good.
Okay. You have a second model, which is the behavioral model of trust.
Yeah.
What are some key findings of this, and how does this inform great leadership?
Yeah, so that model came out of 6 years academic research at Aston Business School. And the key findings of that in terms of research into how leaders build trust, the key findings were that the biggest single factor in building a high trust culture in business is the behavior of the CEO and the senior leadership team. Yeah. So that role modeling, that leading by example. One of the other findings was that CEOs typically rate themselves 29% more trustworthy than do the people who they lead. Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me.
Why does that not surprise you?
Because I just feel like I hear my friends talking so badly about their leaders all the time.
So that 29%, I call that the authenticity gap. The difference between what you think about yourself and your own trustworthiness and how other people see you. So the model of trust that came out of that work is called the 9 habits of trust, because trust is made up of many dimensions. And those 9 habits, again, if leaders practice those with discipline, they will inspire trust in the people that they lead. And the habits are split into 3 areas: habits of ability, habits of integrity, and habits of benevolence. And I think most leaders are familiar with ability and integrity, and they know what that is. Benevolence is an interesting word. Benevolence comes from the Latin benevolent, wishing well. It's the opposite of malevolence. So benevolence is common human care, compassion, kindness. And it turns out that that is equally important in the game of trust as integrity and ability.
Interesting.
Yeah. So you need to play on all 3 dimensions with these habits, because if you work on all 3 in parallel, you can differentiate your leadership and your brand with trust. But if you're only playing in 1 or 2 and you've got a blind spot somewhere else, again, that's going to be tripping you up if you want to stand for trust and purpose.
Does it sort of feel like turning the Titanic with trying to get them on the same page as you? Like, you might see red flags that they don't even think are a flag. So how do you even begin to, I don't know, get them on board and then change them without them getting defensive, without them saying, oh, no, you're wrong, and, you know, shut off?
Yeah, it is like turning the Titanic. I mean, I guess one of the advantages I have is that I've been sort of on the Titanic myself, you know, like I've
really?
No, I'm speaking metaphorically.
You're awfully young.
No, I've led businesses myself. So I've walked in those shoes. I know what it feels like. I know how hard it is. So I can empathize with the challenge that my clients face. But nevertheless, I also have the credibility to challenge them and say, you know, look, this is how the world was, but this is how the world has changed, and this is how we need to change. And I think it helps that that model in particular was based on academic research. So it's harder for people to push it away, because I didn't dream it up over a glass of red wine. You know, it's 6 years research.
Yeah.
So this is the science. And I think if you can present CEOs with credible science, there are people who trust in that, and they do respect that. So I think that's part of what helps them to go on this journey. But you're right, there's a huge amount of change involved, and it's quite deep wiring in some cases. So that's why we have coaches That's why we
That
speak.
is why.
That's why we write books.
Yeah.
Because it's not easy and people need help.
What is at the front of mind for CEOs right now? What are they really feeling?
I think we're in a very fluid, ethical environment. Should I stand for profit? Should I stand for purpose? Am I going to use AI to innovate, or am I going to use AI to exploit? You know, how am I going to handle workforce automation in terms of the impact that could have on the people who work for this organization? So I think CEOs at the moment are surrounded by ethical dilemmas, and not many of them have been on the senior leadership course in ethical decision making. You know, it's not necessarily been on every MBA curriculum over the last 20 years. So I think that's an area where they are concerned, where they are looking for help, and they're grappling, because a lot of these things are dilemmas, and you can't win either way, but you've got to make a choice because you're the boss.
So having those models in place and those mechanisms, tools to use can really help ground you. I can imagine.
Yeah, I think like athletes, you know, what I learned from that world is how athletes work on themselves, and they look after themselves. They control the things that they can control, and that gets them to optimize their performance. I think we've still got more to learn in business about how we get fit, how we get really fit for some of the challenges that we are facing and that we will face in the next few years.
It always seems quite fickle in a sense with, I don't know, Google hypothetically standing so strongly for DEI agendas and sustainability, and then suddenly a leader comes out and says, no, that's not a priority. And then they go, oh yeah, okay, it's not a priority anymore. It's just so it's greenwashing, it's wellness washing, it's diversity and inclusion washing, and it's just, it seems so fickle.
Yeah, and you know, it's purpose washing. And
I know
I love this quote, a quote from Groucho Marx, when he said, "These are my principles, and if you don't like them, well, I've got others." And I think that's a little bit the fickleness, isn't it? That our principles are tradable, our values are tradable. Is that true? Is that really what's going to get us to the next stage of all of this? Because I think that values and principles are exactly that. They're values and principles. They're things that don't come and go, because something has to operate as a rock. Something has to be there that is, you know, that touchstone that informs the rest of our leadership. And if everything becomes fickle and tradable, then we lose touch with that center.
Your new book,
Yeah,
The Art of CEO Coaching. I love that title.
And the working subtitle is The Role, the Soul, and the Context of CEO Life. And we've talked a little bit, haven't we, I think, today about the role of the CEO and how that's changing. The soul, which speaks to this emotional intelligence, this deep wiring, the motivation, the drivers of standing for purpose, and the context, all the things that are changing around the CEO. If I can join the dots on a few of the puzzles and dilemmas that they're facing and play that back to them based on all these conversations that I've had, which I think is a privilege to have heard all these conversations. And if I can package that and play that back, then I'm hoping that that will give CEOs those aha moments.